I get the distinct pleasure of introducing you to John Bain-Chekal, my dear friend here. And he's going to talk to you about how we handled the what were really, truly tremendous financial management transformation issues, organizational change, change management, and really training and learning, active learning stuff that we had to do with people to prepare them for a more sort of corporate view of university finances.
Don't use that word. More rational view.
Rational view. We can go that way. We can go that way. But yeah, less idiosyncratic, perhaps, view of our finances. John did fantastic work leaping into the fray for us to put together a team to help sort of drive that learning and knowledge transfer that we needed with the units, and did it in a really innovative way, and we would have been lost without him. So here he is.
Good morning. Good to see everyone. I like, after Kathy's presentation, to think of a revolutionary who gets to wear cufflinks. There's a new dress code for revolutionaries. I always like to know who's in the room and get a sense of it. I'm guessing from all of you and talking to you that people here have actually implemented a change project before. So raise your hand if you've actually been a lead or had a major role on a significant change project. Okay? Excellent. So this is going to help make these other slides more interesting. Think back on a recent change project that was large and kind of get that in your head. I'd make you talk to each other if we weren't being filmed, but let's get that in our head. Now, on that project, what made it so difficult? What was the challenge? Was it people and skills? Was it the process aspect of it, or was it technology? And I just want to get a show of hands. I'm curious. What was the biggest challenge of the project in your head? Was it people and skills? Raise your hand. Okay. How about for process? How much was process the challenge? Not so much. Okay. And how much for technology? How much was the technology the major hurdle that people had to face with? Interesting. So a majority of you were process and skills. And we're going to talk about how we had to kind of overcome and figure out these different barriers. And I'm going to share a little bit with you on that. But what I want you to do is to take that image that you have in your head of a change project, and I want you to put that on steroids and do 10 of them at once. Because that's what we decided to do. That was the great idea that we had, which was one was not enough. We needed to do 10. And this was just in the finance world. So what really needed to happen, and what we were tasked with, Kathy turned around one day in the office and said, "Hey, why don't you become the director of outreach?" I'm like, "Hey, do I have a choice?" And really, what became a founding value of outreach was partnership and really bringing these together. A lot of efforts are created to support users, and we took a different tact, I think, than usual. We were not the user advocates. We advocated for users on a regular basis, but we also needed to be partners very closely with the budget office and controller's office. But we were not the budget office and controller's office advocates either. And we also needed to work with technology, but we were not the technology advocates. And so I always pushed my team to stay away from one of those buckets and to remain in the role that you really needed to be, which is the user had to integrate everything that was going on. They had to integrate the technology coming in, they had to integrate the finance coming in, and they had to change their processes and they had to change themselves. And so how do we do that? How do we actually support someone to change? It's not easy. And again, as Kathy said up true, this is a great testing kitchen. I want to share with you what we kind of tried and did, kind of keep your change in mind as we talk about this. And I'd really love to talk with you guys at breaks. What worked for you guys and try on some of these? What would you change and do differently? Because we're always trying to innovate here and find new and better ways to kind of keep us moving up the evolutionary curve. So this was all the projects. These are all real projects that were going on. The poor users out there were faced with these. So new technology system, new accounting methodologies, new major queries, everything. So, whoops, too fast. Stop. Okay, so what did outreach need to do? And the vision of outreach wasn't just to train and to get you ready. At the end of the day, the burning platform really was, don't just get ready for this and use this tool. I could really care less about the budget if it doesn't change the university, if it doesn't create financial sustainability, if it doesn't add value in teaching and research and public service. if you have the best budget and you aren't doing those things, you aren't expanding and doing more, it doesn't really matter. So first and foremost, outreach was really to help make value for the organization. We have a short period of time. We have some cash. How are we going to utilize that, and how are we going to strategically think about that going forward? That is the role that has to happen. So again, the effort is not just to be great at budgeting and have a great process. The effort is to really change the world. And that's what was great about the team and Aaron and Laurent. They came in, and I love what Laurent says, we eat innovation for lunch or breakfast. It's like, let's just start the day and be innovative. And that was what kept me here. That's what kept me engaged. And that's really what I think would engage the rest of the campus. So we tried to share that with people. I asked you to think about people, process, technology. We really needed to make these objectives clear, and we needed to change the processes down at the division level because everyone was doing it differently. And some people were doing all of it, and some people doing just parts of it, and some people had no concept of what we were talking about at all. And so in our objectives, we were very clear on what we needed to achieve. We were going to go out, we're going to map your current state process, we are going to come back, we're going to map a future state process, and we are going to be very clear and articulate about what we're doing. Then our second objective is we really need to understand the skill sets. What can you do? And most importantly, it wasn't about just assessing what you're doing or not doing now. It was making visible for the world what the future state looks like. What skill sets are we moving towards? We were kind of the nature that if we kind of made it clear and tried to lay something out there, people can move towards it. A lot of people are like, hey, I could learn that. I could figure that out. None of this is rocket science. So we wanted to lay out and really look at the skill sets and figure out how to kind of give a path for people to follow. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then the chart of accounts. I think the chart of accounts is sexy, and I'm just going to say that. I didn't start out that way, but I've been corrupted. So I'm not going to go too much into the chart of accounts. You're very lucky. 2 people from my team who have done an amazing job are going to walk you through why the chart of accounts is sexy, why it's strategic, and why you really need to think about that. But we needed to do this, and we needed to actually act on it and not just talk about it. And so they'll talk about how we made that happen. And finally, when we did a survey, we did it a baseline, and we said, okay, is it people, process, or technology? The group came back and said, you're missing it. It's not about those 3. We can do that. We can go to training. We can figure out the system. We can map our processes. It's the mind shift. You're telling us that Santa Claus doesn't exist. And we don't believe you, and we want presents at Christmas, and which they think is July 1st, and you're taking that from me. You're taking that away. So I don't want to play with you. You're bad people. And Kathy and I sat, I remember one afternoon, in a hall not too far from here, and we had about 5 colleges represented in the room, financial advisors, high-up financial people, explaining to Kathy and I how we didn't understand the world, that, we don't have revenues here, Kathy and John. You just don't understand. It's called the 5 series. We have expenses. And I'm like, Kathy and I are like looking at each other, and I'm like, the money must be coming from somewhere. I understand you don't see it, but it must be coming from somewhere. And, that was just the beginning of like, we have a lot further to go, kind of walking back, like, how are we going to do this? So those were the early days. So I'm going to kind of share with you the model that we tried and did, very much of the action learning methodology. You have to know, we had fabulous training set up around this that did teach people the skills and the things that you needed to know around the tool, which would go with a typical application implementation. And the training was really superb, a lot of variety, a lot of courses and classes. But what you needed in addition to that at Berkeley, because of this revolutionary factor, was the mind shift. We needed to sit and work with each of the divisions and help them work together better. And so what outreach had to do is to, again, partner to help the divisions actually work with each other more. So when we first talked to deans said, why are you here? I don't want to talk to you about a budget. I have someone I hire who does that. I have no interest in what you have to say. These are real words. And we're like, well, what are your interests? Financial aid for students. We're like, okay, how much do you have now? And they're like, this OE project, aren't you going to reduce the cost so I can have more students in financial aid? We're like, yeah, you could have about this much if we just fire everyone in finance, but you could have this much if you actually get smart about your finances. And so then we could start to have a different conversation with the deans. And we're kind of like, hey, it's up to you, dude. You can have this much or this much. You choose. And if we could start to make it clear and easy to understand with leadership, they could start to get engaged. And you just had to find that nugget that they were actually interested in. So how do we start to do that? We set up a 3-part series. We called them cohorts. We had 6 cohorts running, slightly phased across. In the middle, we called it cohort season. We were starting a cohort, ending a cohort, and in the middle of a cohort. It was a little crazy. But in the preparation phase, we started 5 weeks ahead of time. We said, who's the leader of this group? We sat them down and they signed a statement of work. We said, what are you responsible for? What are the expectations of this role? Back to what Kathy was saying, is making clear that this is leadership. You're not just coming for a training. We're not just going to tell you what to do. You need to get up and do it. You need to get up in front of your people and do it. And so we started with the leaders first and said, let's sit down and sign our expectations. Then right before, you see up here, before we did any workshop, any meeting, we met with the leadership and said, you have 2 roles in the room. You need to be a leader and you need to figure out how to do this. So we're going to give you an advance on everything that we're going to do. We're going to show it to you because I need you to lead your group. And so we had intact work groups. Kirk walked in and said, this is like a workshop. We would have them at tables, intact work groups. And we're like, you're going to learn together. You're going to go back and you're going to do this work together. Action learning. This isn't a training. This isn't a sample. We're going to bring in your data and we're going to make you work on your data. We're not going to work on some sample data. We had a series of 3 workshops that we ran people through. It was 1 week workshop, next week you're doing your homework, workshop, doing your homework, workshop, doing your homework. We pushed action. We had real homework, we had real deadlines, and we followed up with you. The first cohort was a little surprised by all this. By the second cohort, they were starting to get the idea of the gist. I'm going to go over the curriculum in another slide. But then we did action planning. Said, okay, we're done with the cohort. Write down what you're going to do. And then we're going to follow up with you. We're going to follow up with you at 2 weeks. We're going to follow up with you at 4 weeks. And we're going to follow up with you at 8 weeks. And I want to see what you're actually doing. These were important elements in this new world. This new world the old world was very passive. They would like to share their ideas of what they don't like about what you're doing. And then they want to sit there and watch. And I'm like, you don't have to like what I'm doing, but you can't watch. You have to get out and do something. So that was our model. And it was important to kind of instill a new framework for this mind shift. And so this was our framework. Isn't that complicated? We really wanted to instill the concept that in best practice, or concepts out in the world, that strategy is aligned with the annual budget cycle with resource development. That strategy without resources attached to it is just a lot of paper. A budget without a strategy attached to it could be going astray. May not be focused on your priorities. It is definitely paying for things, but is it the right things? And what is the trade-offs that you're making or not making? So we wanted to have this integrated cycle, and we really kind of established this for the group, and then we spent the time in the curriculum working in this cycle, working in these pieces. So the first workshop was all about the bottom of this curriculum. What is the budget cycle? Map it. Up on the wall, get up, get out of your seat, actually do something, put something down, map it, make it visible. We had participants say, this is the first time I've seen this. It's nice to know what other people are doing. I didn't know where that report went. I didn't know where that data came from. That was a great spot. And then we started, actually from workshop 1, we said, we're going to teach you how to communicate. And we're going to start on workshop 1, and we're not going to wait to the end. Because you know what? If you wait to the end, it's too late to communicate. So they looked at us and they said, I don't think we're ready to communicate. We don't know enough. We don't know all the answers to communicate. So we really worked with people and said, you know what? You know more than the next person. So tell them what you know, and it's okay to say you still have these questions and to find out what their questions are, instead of waiting until you know everything. We're never going to know that. We still don't know that today. So had we waited for 2 years, we would be in big trouble. The second workshop, we said, okay, now we're ready to map the future state. We gave you homework. We submitted people into a lot of, how do you see the future state? Business cases, examples. we took actually real world examples, we made them a little bit generic, and then we gave them for people to read and to apply and to try on in their organizations. This was really, really important because it wasn't this business image of a corporate world. This was, let's look at an academic division and see what they're doing. And then they would push on it and say, no, no one does that. I'm like, no, this is a real example. And actually, so the people in the room are participants who actually made this example happen. So I didn't make this up. This is something for you to try. In this, we're also starting people on the chart of accounts. People wanted to start with the chart of accounts immediately, but I said we can't start with the chart of accounts, fixing it until you know what your vision and your strategy and process and why you're changing the chart of accounts. But we could start cleaning them up. So homework for each session out of this was starting to clean up your chart of accounts. And then finally, in workshop 3, we would allow you to get and talk about your chart of accounts. So I want to go backwards and show you. This was one of our top exercises. So Kirk over there came up with this concept, and we said we are going to take one segment of the chart of accounts and we're going to really understand this. And this is what we call the depth idea, the org structure chart of accounts. And we would put it up with stickies that can be moved, and we made visible the chart of accounts that exists up on the wall. And as you can see, it's huge, first of all. And then we incentivize people, as many of these stickies as you can take off and stop having, the better. Because every single sticky has to have a budget. And to me, this looks overwhelming. So I don't know how the hell you keep that into mind. So, but people got into it, and they were literally touching and interacting in their organizational structure, sometimes for the first time. What is this structure? And you can't build strategy or build a budget unless you understand your business components. Why? Why do we have this unit? How does this unit interact? Why do I want to put a budget to it? You need to make this happen. Now, this is detrimental. A very high-level person on the campus who's very professional and is fabulous. I was pulled over. I often get pulled over in these working sessions, and she was in tears, absolutely in tears. And I was like, oh my God, what, did you step on her foot? What did you do to her? And it was just the fact of having her world up on the wall made it very scary. And so that's when I started to realize, and I took it more seriously, that this is people's lives up there, and they're very personally connected to what's going on. And so we really tried to keep that in mind in the team instead, not to make light of it, but to really help people make that transition. And that's kind of the human aspect that comes with this kind of scale and size of transition. We still did have fun, though. Lots of stickies and lots of movement. And I cannot tell you how complicated it is to actually make that happen. It's not as easy as it looks. Okay. So that was the curriculum. How did we make visible the skill sets? We came up with this methodology that said, let's list out the skills. We had 3 categories. There's tools and technical skills that you needed to learn. There was strategic financial analysis and forecasting thinking that you needed to learn. And there was the way we work, learning and performance. So just the factor of you document, you know how to run a project, you know how to make change, you know how to be a leader, you know how to be strategic about your thinking, and you can actually utilize the tool. You can run a query, you can utilize Excel, you can think about this strategically. So we needed to learn all of that. And then I said to the group, they were like, okay, well, we came up with this, it's beautiful. And I said to my team, as I often do, and they hate me for it, I said, great, now tell me 5 dimensions of it and start writing out what does it look like here, here, and here. And they're like, I don't want to do that. But they never actually say that to my face. They always go back and do it. But what we wanted to do is to make visible, this is what it looks like at this level, this is what it looks like at this level, and this is what it looks like at this level. And everyone doesn't have to be a 5. When you build a team, you don't all have to be a 5, but you better make sure across your team, you're up managing the 5s. And so helping people understand, this isn't to assess you, to kick you out, or to not get you going. This is to help you figure out what is your performance learning that you need to do for the year. We're going to tell you it's right here. We're going to make visible. This is going to be out there. When you're setting up your team and you're partnering, figure out who's working on which dimension of this. Make sure you understand all 3 dimensions. And then we're going to keep measuring as we go through in time, and you're going to see a change in that skill set. So that was for broad financial, divisional financial officers and financial analysts. This is how you work with deans. In fact, this is even too many words and a slide, even a piece of paper isn't great for deans. You really needed to have a conversation with deans. And when we started in the conversation with deans, we're like, of course you want to do this, and of course you want to be strategic, of course you want to have a budget. And they're like, no. So when we did finally, as I talked earlier, get to them interested in the conversation, they said, yeah, let's jump to the end, which is really where they wanted to be. They wanted to be here. Let's talk about optimizing and aligning strategy. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, not yet. We don't even have data. You haven't even seen your numbers. We talked to one dean, she didn't even know how big her organization was overall. She's always seen it in increments. I'm like, did you know your organization is 70 million? No. This conversation, while that's where they're always thinking, they are strategically trying to align their resources. They are committed to their programs. They're amazing people. They have a lot of great ideas. They actually don't and aren't as skilled in actually aligning those strategies and priorities with the budget and the operations. And they wanted to start there, but we needed to get them to start over here to actually look through their data, and understand their level of decision making. And that was hard. That felt like putting on the brakes and slowing down. And they're like, aren't you here to talk about the future? I'm like, I am, but the future still is actually seeing the data. And this table over here, it took an amazing amount of work to get that data all in, as you've heard, and human capital management and everything. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. It comes out of years and brilliant minds managing data at the highest level. We did say that you can go at whatever pace you want. If you're ready to look at the data and you're ready to refine your processes and stand up as a leader and actually make decisions and make those decisions visible and communicate those decisions, you can jump here and I'm ready to have that conversation with you. So you choose how fast you want to go. We'll help you at whatever stage you're at. And again, that's the value that we try to provide, which is to help everyone at whatever stage of development that they're actually at. So, as you can tell, I love process mapping. So we did a lot of process mapping. We're not going to go through the boxes. I want to show you at the highest level what we wanted everyone to understand. So there's two things in this process map to know. One is we built the communication at the top. Here's the task that you have to do, and to say that there's a responsibility for communication. We don't communicate enough here. We could communicate more, but we wanted to be really precise about what you needed to communicate. And so we tried to make it simple. We said, communicate your priorities prior to doing the budget process. Tell them how the budget process is going to work and how the decisions are going to be made. And at the end, just tell them what decisions you made and why. Those are really important pieces of information. So then we mapped out, well, what does it look like? And we combined resource allocation, again, with setting of priorities. How do these things look together? And these are not separate tasks. And whose roles are which? That there are executive roles, and there's also people who need to make this happen. And then finally, there's this role of when you're in the phase of things, just managing and monitoring. It's a different level. There's different levels to understand setting up your budget, making decisions on your budget, and then actually managing and monitoring your budget. Then the big push from Aaron and John Wilton, especially in this last budget season, is understand where you make trade-offs in this process throughout the year. This is not about always asking for more money. The usual was, I'm doing all this great work, can I have more money? I'm doing all this great work, I have these great ideas, can I have more money? And we're trying to push it back that says, what trade-offs are you making throughout the organization? Let's see those, let's talk about those. Let's use the resource envelope that you have and make trade-offs in that. So trade-offs happen at multiple levels. They happen in the beginning of the process in priority setting. They happen kind of at a lower level throughout the departments. And finally, they happen towards the end in the managing and monitoring. And we have to be precise, really helping people understand those trade-off moments so that they can really optimize those. And so that's kind of where we're at now, is to get to these trade-off points. What tools can we do to support them? So I want to talk about, well, what did our team look like? And this is a little bit of Aaron's concept of a third and a third and a third. We had to get up to speed really, really fast. So we did have outside professional experts. We had project staff, and we had campus financial analysts. And so the first box, this was very important. We took people who were known and respected in their community of finance, and we brought them onto the team, and they were 40%, and they went out and they led these workshops with their colleagues. It makes a huge difference, as Kathy talked about earlier, when your colleague who you trust and respect is sitting next to you telling you, we can do this, we can figure it out, I'm here to help you. I'm not a consultant, I'm not from the outside, I'm not from a different world, I'm from your world. So these were key and crucial. Mary Stapleton was one of our... And let me tell you, it was not easy to do that. People were very skeptical, and people are tough in this organization. I also needed staff that I knew was 100% committed and would do whatever I asked them to do. Not that the others weren't, but I needed people that I could work really, really hard. And so my project staff, I worked really, really hard. Again, in hiring, I did try to hire as many as possible from campus and to bring them on. This was a great growth opportunity. We are going to try new things and change the world. And so that was the draw. And I think we did that and offered some fun things along the way. And we also had an organizational development expert on staff because so much of this was change. My outside experts, this is about partnering with your consultants. This is about bringing them in, putting them on the team. My consultants do not just sit and advise. They work very, very hard. And we had to get this up. I had about 2 months to go from Kathy turning around in the office one day to actually hitting the ground and getting this out on campus. And I could not have done it if I didn't have consulting staff that were ready to go on day one. I couldn't train. I didn't have time. I needed someone who could go and hit the ground running. And so they hit the ground running and said, okay, whatever it is, we'll figure it out. We'll make it happen. We'll build it. We'll go out there. They did whatever I needed them to do. It was fabulous. And this is a great learning relationship. Really understanding what it is on the ground, really understanding what's good of the organization that you want to retain, really kind of being part of the project and owning it, not just temporarily, but this is ongoing. This is not going to disappear. This is an amazing learning environment. It's tough sometimes because we disagree and we kind of rash things out, but the answer is always better. And what I always tell my team is we go for fair process, which is I want to hear the best answer and I don't care where it comes from. And I want to hear from multiple points of view. So as much as we can do that, not that I'm always like that, but as my team will tell. Some things along the way that we found were beneficial in change management concepts. Integrate our activities. Again, we were about partnership. Our partnership with the controller's office and the budget office was to not just go and tell them what we were doing. It was to integrate them on the team as much as possible. We co-taught a course, the Workshop 3, with the controller's office. The budget office staff were often in running our workshops with us, sitting at the table. They were in the sessions when we were behind the scenes trying to figure out how to change the world. They were changing the world for us and teaching us how to do that so we could teach our clients how to do that. We were very integrated, and that was crucial. The Vice Chancellor and the CFO, Aaron and John Wilton, they needed to go out there and set the strategy. They needed to talk at the highest level and say, these people are working with me for my strategy, so pay attention to them. If we didn't have that, half of what we needed to accomplish wouldn't have happened. If your leadership can't stand up and talk and say what the strategy is, I wouldn't want that job. So I again thank them standing behind us and paving the way to make it happen. Technology, Cal Planning, again, it wasn't just like, oh, you build it, tell us what it is, and we'll train on it. We were intimately involved on a regular relationship, really trying to understand. We tried to add value back. This is what we hear. Sometimes we would push back on the users and say, you can't have that. Sometimes we would push back on Cal Planning and say, you can't build it that way. Sometimes they loved us, sometimes they hated us. But again, it was that really, really good conversation. And that got everyone. Implement your plans. Don't just be a lot of talk and a lot of hot air. Demonstrate, model, implementation. So we put the cohort model together and we implemented it. We did depth ID level budgets. We didn't just say you needed to go there. We built a curriculum around it. We got report books around it. We went and met with every single division around it. And we sat with people and said, we'll sit with you until you get it done. Chart of account inactivations. We said clean up your chart of accounts. We ran your data. We showed you how. You validated it. You told us you agree or don't agree. Make it action, 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 action. And designing and implementing one hierarchy, my teammates will go into a little bit more. Tracking progress, another thing for Berkeley that changed the environment, which is someone's paying attention. And I'm going to put a red, green, or yellow next to your division. You choose which color you want. But we're paying attention, and we're not tracking you to get you in trouble, but I am tracking you to see if you're standing up and taking leadership. And so this is huge. These two forms, these are real action things that happened. It also helped us partner together, so the budget office could say, oh, I work with them, I can go out and talk to them, I can go help them, and they would help people. We wanted everyone to be green as much as possible. And to know that they weren't, that they were struggling and having trouble, someone would often volunteer to go out and help them. And finally, always, always, always evaluate your results. This front one is actually results across divisions for their capacity skill set assessment. And behind here was a demonstration on how to actually do the future state in a school or college, because everyone told us we couldn't. So of course, we love it to prove them wrong. And then count your numbers. Liz will like this. She was just asking me for metrics to prove that we did something. For the workshops, we completed 6 cohorts where we had 6 to 8 divisions in a room at a time. We worked with 36 of the divisions actually attended, which is amazing. This was not mandated. We got them there. They came. They attended. This was, as you can see, a huge amount of work. 165 alumni, over 70 plus deliverables that they had to complete and that we tracked. Of this, we started these numbers on Chart of Accounts. I think the most amazing number is 1. We now had 1 set of Chart of Account guidelines instead of 36, 55. This is how we're going to use it. At Berkeley, we like to say you can be creative in dress, you can be creative in thought. You're not creative in the Chart of Accounts, just to be clear. We did get to meet with the deans. As you can see, we didn't meet with all of leadership. That's kind of a future state we want to continue to do and stay on that road. And we did track 46 metrics throughout this to prove that actually the money was well spent. Okay, we're done. I would like to introduce Kirk Tanz and Maya Woodson-Turman. They are both from my team, and they're going to go over for you a little bit why infrastructure projects are so strategic. This is a great opportunity. They're going to make this look really easy, just so you know it's not, so don't be fooled by that. But they're going to explain how to make it as easy as possible.
Do you want to click? You're standing here? Okay. Hey, everybody. So this is the sexy part of the program. Give you a little shimmy. But we are going to talk about the critical infrastructure. It's going to be a lot of Chart of Accounts that we're going to talk about, and in particular, what we've dubbed the One Hierarchy Project. So if you click us to the next slide, Maya. This, just for an orientation, is what the Chart of Accounts looks like here at Berkeley, just so we're all on the same page of what a full chart string represents. And in I guess it's sort of gold, you have the business unit. That's UC Berkeley. It's also the foundation. We have a couple here. Account categories, these are your object codes. You've got your fund. This is who gave you the money, what can you use the money for. Your debt ID. Now that's the lowest level of the entity hierarchy. So that is what was the focus of the One Hierarchy Project. That was the focus of the picture John showed you with the multicolored sticky notes up on the wall. Program code, this comes down from UCOP based on Nakubo or OMB 21, or it has historical value. CF1 and CF2, those are our flex codes. CF1 is mostly used for projects, but not exclusively. And CF2 is mostly used for PI faculty, again, not exclusively. So we do have an example of a full chart string in the fourth row. So your business unit is UC Berkeley. Maybe you're buying an equipment purchase. You're using restricted NIH funds for the Division of Neurobiology. It's Instructional Department Research is your program code, and then maybe this is on a grant on research and obesity, and maybe here using CF2 as sort of a sub-activity to categorize the phase of the trial. And we do have a translation for anyone from UC Davis, just so you can sort of see it too. What we want to focus on is that the key to this Chart of Accounts and why it is so sexy is that the intersections of each of the 7 segments here, that's the really important part, and we want to make sure that we leverage all the segments as we go. So before we wade in, any questions about what the chart looks like, how it's different than yours? Translations? No? All right.
Just one of the key things is we We have a chart of accounts guidelines document that made it clear in terms of what each of these segments mean and how you should apply them.
Yep.
Kirk worked on that document, and it's led us in
Yeah.
identifying those.
Yeah, we've
critical
defined what
items.
we think the future state use should be, and there's a single use for each segment, and we think that's really important. So, skipping ahead to the next one, in all of this design work, we decided that we needed to come up with the guiding philosophy. And so these are our guiding principles. The high-level thing to remember is that, yes, it has to be complicated enough so that we can capture all of the different reporting requirements that you have, that you can meet external reporting requirements or the internal management requirements that you have. But it also has to be simple enough so that schmoes like me can code things properly and make it all work the way it's supposed to work. And one additional thing that is sort of, I think, new and revolutionary for Berkeley is that we want to be able to compare what we do with what other people do. So having consistency with just sort of industry standard practice and the way we call different segments and the way we treat different segments, so that one, we can benchmark with other awesome universities like those represented here, and two, so that when you need to hire a new person or when you need to train up that person who's internal and really promising, that we have a standard for it and it's translatable. So if you wouldn't mind skipping ahead. One, we'd like to talk about linear versus matrix style chart of accounts. And this is part of our framework. The linear is kind of the old world, and we saw a lot of this at Berkeley, and this is what we're trying to move away from. So in this linear style chart of accounts, what you end up seeing is that you take a single value from a single segment, and you just try and wrap up everything you can into that single value so you can push a button and get a meaningful piece of data that you're interested in. And here's an example taken from Housing and Dining Services. Their restaurants are all defined as an L6. And we have 7 levels in the org tree we'll talk about a little bit later. But within each one, they have a dept ID. So this is the transactional level unit for raw food and utilities and food prep. The question becomes when you want to say, well, how much did I spend on raw food just across Housing and Dining Services, or how much did I spend on my utilities? You have to go add up dozens of different results from different dept IDs, and it really limits the way that you can cut your data. So we want to make sure that we move away from this and get into a more sophisticated intersection of the data. And the other thing that gets complicated is, it's a raw food dept ID, but then if you bought frozen food, is it both frozen and raw? What if you code your student labor incorrectly there? Are they raw food students? I don't know. So they become complicated. Frozen people, that's where they are.
Right, and the point there is that you could put it in any account because you've captured it in your raw food account. So it can lead to miscoding, just improper usage of the
And when you look
accounts.
at your expenses based on account versus based on a dept ID level review, you get totally different answers. So the goal is to move to the next slide, which is the matrix style chart of accounts. So here, in Housing and Dining Services, what we would propose is that you take the organization down to the lowest level of the transaction. And so maybe it's administrative, and maybe you still have a couple dept IDs, and one's an administrative dept ID, and one is just general operations dept ID. But you use those in combination with the other segments, and so in our example, it's the account hierarchy. And if you want to know how much did I spend at a particular restaurant on gas or electricity, you can run it at the lowest level account code. If you want to see utilities at a higher level, you can run it at that level. But no matter which level you run it at the org tree versus the account hierarchy, you're getting a meaningful cut of the data. And the really cool thing, I think we have one more. Yeah. The really cool thing is that when you do this, it's easier to cut your data, it's easier to understand things, but you can get to a point where you can start comparing cool ratios, doing sophisticated analyses. You can start to talk about, well, which restaurant is more efficient from a utility perspective? Or even within the tree, which restaurant has a better administration cost to operations cost ratio? And if somebody is better in those ratios, why are they better? Can we analyze it? Can we translate that to the other restaurants? Can we make Berkeley a better place by making sure that our infrastructure is being used to its maximum benefit?
That's the key.
Yeah. All right. So unless we have questions about sort of the high-level structure and where we're trying to go with a matrix, I think we're going to jump in. Maya's going to talk to us about the One Hierarchy project specifically.
All right. So chart of accounts, it's key, we know that. We had to start somewhere. We knew we needed cleanup, but we needed to focus our efforts on one effort. And we thought, let's go for the one that's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck. We're talking about reporting. We want to make sure we align our reporting hierarchy with our department IDs. We want to align reporting and management requirements with our entity hierarchy structure, because then you can roll up that meaningful data that Kirk talked about. So we decided to focus on Dept ID. We started it in isolation, but we knew we would come back to it. It was going to be an iterative process, and we were going to link in other segments of the chart of accounts. That's it. I'll do one. Okay, so we came up with the One Hierarchy project. And again, as we talked through with outreach, it's partnership. This was a partnership project with, it was a culmination of all the work that was done in the cohorts. So in workshop 3, we had those stickies up on the board and people were moving their Dept IDs around. And we worked with the divisions. We had outreach members who reached out to the divisions and helped them redesign their entity hierarchies. So that was the first part of the project. Redesign the entity hierarchy with the divisions and build it. If we build it, they will come, hopefully. And then the second part of that project was we found that people were not using, we have this, BFS is our system of record. It has an entity hierarchy structure built in today. We found that a lot of the systems across campus were not utilizing that hierarchy structure. For whatever reason, they were building their own hierarchies within their own systems because they needed to get the work done, and it was just easier for them to build it rather than link back into the hierarchy structure. So the second component of this project was to really everyone utilize the same hierarchy structure across all systems.
That's why it's the One Hierarchy project.
Yeah, that's one.
There's one, we all are going to use it. And the really interesting thing about everybody using the same tree is that then when you want to compare financial data to non-financial metrics, suddenly it's really clear where the different metrics live and what comparisons you can make without having to do the backflips that people have been trying to do for years on campus.
Right, so we're aligned, and even for HR, their reporting is aligned with our hierarchy structure. So we did this across 35 divisions. We provided the initial framework for them, so the L1 to L3 framework, and we'll go through the details of what those mean. We provided that because that was really for higher level leadership, what they were going to look at, what they needed to see from a top level perspective. And then understanding that each division is different and they manage their businesses differently, we allowed them to design their own hierarchy structure from the L4 to L7 level. And that, again, a lot of that work was done in the cohort series, workshop 3, and it was fine-tuned as needed.
Yeah, and people were really excited to get a chance to look at their hierarchy because we haven't done a holistic overhaul of the hierarchy since it was implemented about 12 years ago, is my understanding. So things have changed a lot in 12 years, and your roll-ups and your reporting structures have not changed. So this is big.
Right, and so we had some low-hanging fruit. Some of it was people had Dept IDs that were out there that they hadn't used in 3 years, and that was another project called the Inactivations Project, but we said, let's just go after that right away. We can take that out and say, you don't use this, you haven't used it in 3 years, let's get rid of it. Then we found that, again, we were duplicating segments, so let's get rid of that raw food Dept ID. Utilize the account, move those dollars into the account, and then put it into an admin or an operations Dept ID. Yep. We identified 900 Dept IDs from that reevaluation of usage and need. One of the key things, too, I think we've already mentioned is you're going to have to budget at that level. So is it really realistic to have 1,000 Dept IDs that you're going to have to budget to? Is that worth the time and money?
Yeah, because 1,000 Dept IDs multiplied by however many funds you have, by however many expense codes you're going to use, is a big number.
Right. All right, so then we built it. It was a great partnership with the divisions. We worked with the LIMS. We indicated that was a key membership role, partnership role. And then now we are in the implementation phase of rolling it out across systems. So there are 43 systems across campus. that utilize some form of a hierarchy, some form of a chart field, and we are implementing that. So this has taken, so the cohort series went over the summer. That was the redesign. And then we started building the hierarchies in November, December.
Communicating with the enterprise systems in September of last year, building the tree in December. We're still communicating with them.
Right.
And when's go live?
We're going live July 5th, the weekend of July 5th. Yay! We're excited. So one of the things that's key is here, we started this came out of implementing HCM and the Cal planning tool, but it really is going to benefit the entire campus and all of the systems, though they don't always feel it yet, but eventually they're not always excited about that. But we've been working, it's been a great partnership, a great learning. We found that communication across systems is very key. In particular, we're looking at DEPT IDs. So the lowest level of a DEPT ID, we've had to ground the system owners and say, now this is the 5-digit code that's also called the org code, which is also the DEPT ID, which is also the L7. And every time we started a conversation, we had to start there, and then we could go forward.
Yep.
Okay, so this is just to take you through where we were in our hierarchy and then where we are today. So this was our initial, when I talked through the L1 to L3, this was our high level, this is L2. So UC Berkeley is L1, and then L2 are these, originally we had these control units. And the purpose of the control units were really to just kind of get information out there. They weren't necessarily aligned with the decision makers and the reporting structure. And you can see it's really people focused, and there's disparity in terms of the numbers that are being evaluated.
Yeah, and disparity in terms of who's represented within it, right? So if you're in the EVCP, there are 35 deans who are key decision makers who are all lumped into a single group in the tree. So we want to make sure that we're a little more consistent, that we lined up based on where the key decisions need to be happening on campus.
Right. And so this was also a change, too, because we had people who were assigned, and they owned these units, and we decided to get rid of these units. And so that changed, well, what's my role going to be, and how am I going to get the information out? We came up with, I want to also just take you through further about the past. So we found that we were communicating at the L2, it wasn't really representative of reporting, and then we found that it wasn't really consistent with how people were, it wasn't consistent across campus how people were looking at their business or at their divisions. We did find that L4 was a key level that people were managing their business, but it wasn't consistent.
And not necessarily where you want the key decision making to happen on campus, right?
Right, it didn't represent where the deans and the vice chancellors and the executive directors sat. So our first approach was align it with our needs from L1 to L3, and so at the L3 we're going to define divisions that are appropriate, that align with those decision makers. We wanted to retain the L4 because people were already managing there, and it's a key area within each division to manage. It's a higher level management. And then for technical reasons, we needed to have an L5 and L6. In some cases, people had L5s and L6s because they really were managing at that level. Some cases they weren't. But from a technical perspective, when you're running programs and they're trying to find things at certain levels, if you have breaks in those levels, it's really difficult to program the system to work effectively.
And so I'll just jump in on one other thing. As you look at the future state and you think about the way that technology has been, and you think that you in the room have both money responsibilities, but you also have planning, all of our technology has drill up, drill down, right? So again, you're never taking little pieces and adding them up manually. You're never taking those paper ledgers. You want everything to be, you look at this level, whether it's courses or metrics, and then you can drill down. So it's important because in this world here, which was done with very different flat file technology, right? So if you're having all these flat files, the fact that it's jagged doesn't matter. We're all used to working on Amazon. We're all used to going on Google. We're all used to web-based. They drill through. That's how people's minds are being shaped through everything in the world. So this future state allows us to do that with all of our data sets, not just the finances.
All right, so we're going to go through just where we are today. So this is our new high-level structure. It's more consistency in terms of dollars. There's alignment with the decision makers at the L2. So
Yeah.
again, UC Berkeley's L1, letters and sciences colleges, all of those are L2s,
Yeah.
and then our L3 divisions are the next row over, or the next column over. So let's see. And then again, we outlined that they had their own flexibility in developing their L4s to L7s.
Yeah, and this list of L3 divisions, that is also a consolidated list from what it was in the past. Now we have about 40 divisions that we've identified on campus, and there is a key decision maker, an executive librarian, or a dean or vice chancellor. Thank you. But we used to have 53, and a lot of them were in the administrative side and had been broken out little pieces, little sort of fiefdoms had been broken out. And so we've sort of pulled those in and consolidated those so we have a more manageable number of divisions.
All right, so we just want to spend a little bit of time on the L4s to L7. So L4, we found people were already managing at this level, so we wanted to retain that and then bring some fine tuning to it so that it was consistent across divisions. So an L4 department, there's a defined business objective. It's an organized group of people. We have a budget manager. This is a key concept. We want someone to own that reporting structure, that financial reporting responsibility. And in some cases, this is a chair, or there is an actual finance person there, or there's a partnership between the two of them. There are multiple programs that are run within the department. And then just for historical reasons, we assigned space at our L4. On the right-hand side, you'll see that these are examples of some of the departments that we've identified. The first three, field of study, immediate office for a dean, or center of lab, those are academic departments. And then the last two are more administrative departments. And then, I'm not going to go into detail, but then we had L5s and L6s below that. And so if there was a management need at the L5 or L6 level, we assigned that. If there wasn't, because we needed that smooth hierarchy, we created dummy L5s and L6s, and we made those clearly visible that those were dummies.
Yeah.
So
And the guiding principle on whether or not you need it is, it would still match the same basic criteria, right? This remains part of your org tree. This is part of the structure. There's accountability for the budget. There's an ownership of the budget. And there's a real business reason why we're managing at this, extra level of granularity.
All right, so the L7, that's the lowest level. Again, we had some low-hanging fruit there that we could just right away take off the top. The L7 kind of closely aligns with the department, so there's a business objective. We have some local finance people who own the budget there, and again, this is the level where we budget in our Cal planning tool. So you really want to make sure we wanted to make sure they understood that this is an important unit and it's worthwhile to budget to it. I'm not going to go through all the detail. One of the key factors, again, was duplication. Are we duplicating our work? Mm-hmm. Do you really need it? And then the impact on how you report.
Yeah, and again, whether or not you've created an L7 this is my L7 for sponsored funds, or this is my L7 for student salaries. Whether or not you're coding in other things, we really want to be clear that this is your org tree versus your account hierarchy or your fund tree.
All right, so this is just a snapshot of Unix and how they're using. It's a fully utilized entity hierarchy, and so this is a before shot. I think they did do some work. Mary worked with them on that. They did do some redesign, but they were doing a good job of utilizing the entire hierarchy. So I'm just going to take you through. So there's University Extension is the L4, and then there's Unix. Academic departments, they're using their L5. Then they've got 4 L6s below that. And then within each of the L6s, they do have DEPT IDs, but we're just focusing on this one. And then in arts and letters, they have an admin DEPT ID and a program DEPT ID. In some cases, like I indicated, in L5 and L6, if you didn't have a business use, we would just put a dummy in there.
Yeah, and this is the exercise. This was the homework in the outreach section. To take the sticky notes, which represented your org tree, move them around, and make sure you got the reporting you needed out of it.
Right. All right, and then we're going to go on to reporting. Are there any questions on the hierarchy, just the design and
The exercise, yeah.
how do you manage forward maintaining this chart of accounts? I mean, do you have like a central repository system, MDM system, where you push it to all the system that feed, or is it just, done system by system?
So the hierarchy is housed in our BFS system. So, and then all of the other systems link into that.
Yeah, BFS is our named PeopleSoft Financials.
Because of what it means. Yeah, PeopleSoft Financials is our system of record.
That basically dictates. What about the subsystems that are just standalone? How do you actually sync them up with?
We have an enterprise data warehouse, and the BFS org tree flows from PeopleSoft into that warehouse, and then the other systems can take it from there.
One of the things, though, that the One Hierarchy project highlighted for us is that there were some systems that really should have been getting data from other core systems. So let's just say 8 years ago, someone came up with this system that was flagged by this, because as we were making changes, its feed was going to break. And we said, wow, we have this whole other data set for facilities, which also uses this One Hierarchy, but you're really talking about how the mice move around campus. So if something changes in that facilities world, that makes a much bigger impact to you than some of this other stuff. That is a core system fed from our hierarchy, but you should be pulling your data there. So it's also helped us as we've gotten more mature in terms of using enterprise systems, highlight some areas where we've done local solutions that we need to help them understand what else is available and have us think systematically about how do we better partner with campus on that. So this has highlighted a lot of other technical issues in the core of the question you just asked.
And
Yeah.
we have uncovered, I think work study management was one of our systems that, they weren't aware of how their system was working. So we've uncovered a lot of things where people now can be proactive and redesign their programs to work more effectively. They were just going with the Band-Aid that existed and just putting more and more Band-Aids on it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to have it so that it works effectively and they can design it effectively.
Yeah, and I think it's been easier to sell that we should start thinking about how do you update this in the future, and how does each of the enterprise systems make those updates? Because we see this first wave of the One Hierarchy project as the first iteration. I mean, we're already doing deep dives with some divisions on campus to even think further about what should their structure be, what are the best practices, and so there are, I mean, I don't mean it as a threat, but we're doing it again, right? It's going to come up again and again, and as the university evolves, it's just natural that our structures would need to change, and that we'd start a new center, and we'd need to create a reporting structure so that you can reflect that. So we are keeping an eye toward documenting everything that we're doing on this project and making sure that people understand we need long-term solutions to manage this, rather than just, here's a snapshot in time and we fixed it all once.
Right.
We need to be able to maintain. So that was sort of the what of the exercise that we asked people to come through. This is the sell. This is the why that we gave to the local division users and why this is going to be so important to them. And what it really comes down to is that you can have canned reports that are consistent and that are meaningful at every level in the organization. So in the red-orange box, those are our L4s. And they all meet the definition of an L4. I think this is math and physical sciences. Mm-hmm. They sum down to your division at the L3 level. So when you take your L3 and expand into it, you get something meaningful the next layer down. And this is a snapshot from our Shrek now. We're showing the expenses section of it. But what you get to see is your expenses by department spread across the different fund groups. And when you start to have the conversation about what is the next new initiative that you want to have, and do I have the money for it, suddenly what used to be kind of a black hole, you can say, well, where is the money? And where are things sitting? And we skip to the next one. We also have the ability to drill in. So you can take you can take the L3 and drill into the L4s and see the specific Schreckner for the L4s, and you can drill in further than that. So you can get going up and down really meaningful layers of granularity or aggregation. And that's kind of the pitch for why this is important and why this matters for you as a local user, for you as a chair, for you as a dean or vice chancellor.
Just to highlight here, it gives the ability, we're talking about all funds and really managing dollars, all of your dollars. And so being able to look at it this way, you can see if you're really running your division, it's not run by the department level, and there are some departments that have funds that are available and you have a project initiative for the division. By being able to look at it this way, you can see where the puts and takes are, and you can then present that to your team and negotiate those.
It comes back to the trade-off points that John described earlier in the
Right.
budget process.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, the last thing on the reports is that the new tool, and we are working on it, does have functionality that you can burst out reports to different stakeholder groups. So your deans can get a set of reports, your chairs can get a set, your local managers can get a set, and that was another really appealing thing, that I don't have to go run the report and then mail it out to 20 people. I can set this up. So that's functionality that's coming, that's delivered, and we're excited about that one. And it was a good candy to offer.
Yes, yes.
The last thing is what's coming next. We said that you can't do this in isolation. So CF2 is on the plate for the next big thing. We'd like to define it as PI and faculty. In particular, we have a contracts and grants implementation for the PeopleSoft contracts and grants module. That would be really helpful if we knew exactly what the PI was for all of those. We have a PI portfolio also coming up. And beyond that, tracking startup retention recruitment dollars, having a consistent value to represent those faculty will be big. And maybe the big gorilla in the room is fund. I think Aaron mentioned that we had 22,000 funds. So there are a lot of funds on campus, some of which will be alleviated with the contracts and grants module and moved into a project ID. But there are a lot of unrestricted funds, at least 24 unrestricted funds.
No, there's 762 unrestricted funds. It's too much.
Yeah, okay. All right. So consolidation of those would be sort of the next big thing. But as you work on one segment, there are sort of naturally things that bounce into the other segments. And so we're just trying to find that balance and make sure that we keep in mind it's the intersections that matter, and making sure that we move forward with that in mind. And I think Laurent is going to come next and maybe talk about TempBudg, one more transformation on the infrastructure side.
Good job. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, that chart of accounts complexity is really killer, as it turns out. If we talked earlier on about the importance of being able to plan for the whole chart of accounts and understand the whole chart of accounts. If it turns out that the chart of accounts is so massive that you can't understand it, you're really in a bind. We did the math at one point, and Berkeley's chart of accounts had 2.6 sextillion possible intersections in it. It's just mind-boggling complexity. And so how do you understand a huge distributed organization when it's got that much data and craziness in it? So here we're saying we're doing accounting here. Really, we're going to talk a little bit about the TempBudg. And strangely, the temporary budget really is kind of an accounting thing in our world. Those of you who aren't familiar with the temporary budget, you'll get a little briefing in it. We realized early on that if we weren't going to change this, we were only going to be so successful in our change efforts through installing a Hyperion planning system. What we really desperately wanted to have was a system where you can plan for your whole chart of accounts, and have it just be a plan, have it not have any real meaning other than just, this is what I intend to do or what I expect to have happen. And then separately have actual results that include real expenses, real revenues, but also internal allocations, balances, things like that, which are real, actual accounting results. And the temporary budget sort of commingled lots of different things together, planning functions, as well as real accounting data. And so this made it hard. Your plan was more than just your plan. It was also how much money you had. And this led to a lot of complexity in being able to really plan for everything and to separate out and be able to do like plan versus actual real normal budget variance analysis. So Barbara Wesselman and Bradley Spur here are two crackerjack analysts in my shop who helped us pull this stuff apart and really understand how we could live in a world where we didn't use the temporary budget. And in order to do that, we had to think a bit about what are the different functions that the temporary budget performs and how would we give each of those functions a home in our new world of accounting to let us move forward. So now I'm assuming that the way that we use the TempBudg is similar to the way other campuses here in the room use it. Tell me about it if this is different than how you guys did it. I'm sure some of this was local decision-making about how we would implement it, but in general, I think the overall concepts are probably pretty similar. So here's a standard report that we would use on campus, looking at TempBudg in a unit on a central campus fund. So say 19900 funds, general funds. You can see here we've added a bunch of different columns to sort of disaggregate what the TempBudg had. But what the TempBudg really has when you run the report is just that thing all the way at the right, just total. But what you can see is that it actually had a bunch of different things going on in it. And maybe we can talk about that. So first, it had information in it on prior year carry forward. So, in an accounting sense, this would be prior period ending balance, fund balances, or equity. But this is how much money they had to begin the year that they ended the prior year with. So we would have a credit on an expense account, and that meant fund balance. Then separately, we had what here we call the July adjusted budget. This was the TempBudg download into the department's chart strings of the money that they would get for the year. And so this is actually doing a couple different things at the same time. One, it's doing an actuals transaction, which is to actually move $14,000 to this department. And then separately, it was also at the same time, perhaps generally, planning for how they might intend to spend it. So it's telling us $13,000 for wages and benefits, $500 for general supplies, $500 unallocated. Maybe they're going to figure out how they're going to use that. But the fact that it was doing two things there is tricky. Next, a department might be doing another function with it too. They may be rebudgeting. This is just a pure planning function here, where they might be saying, actually, you know what? I know what I'm going to do with some of that unallocated money, and with my carry forward balance, I'm going to use it. So I'm going to reallocate my fund balance as well as this unplanned amount to be used for wages and general supplies. I may also actually be transferring within that same fund, giving some of my 19900 money to another unit. So perhaps this is two transactions here. Maybe they gave $200 to another unit and they got $700 from another unit. And we also might actually be doing inter-fund transfers. So we might have been using state money on a capital project, say. Well, maybe we wouldn't do that exactly, but some funds, we may be moving balance to that other fund. And so this is really a non-operating activity. This is a below-the-line activity that we're doing, but it winds up showing up as a debit to expense in our plan. So this is a little challenging. And at the end of the day, what you really would see is just, well, here's my plan, $13,500 for wages and benefits, $1,200 for general supplies. I have unallocated of $100. And at the end of the day, really the way to understand that $14,600 was, that's balance. So my budget was really balance, and balance was $14,600 before I looked at actuals. So these are those functions that we listed below the line there, the different functions that the temporary budget was really doing for us. It was budgeting, allowing us to plan for what our revenues and expenses would be. It was doing intra-fund resource transfers, so adding a chart field 1 or moving money between two spots on campus. It was also moving money below the line for capital projects, or pulling principal balance out of, say, an FFE invested in our endowment. And it was also telling us the sum total of prior period results, our carry forward balance. So in order to have that idealized world where we can have a plan for everything and actual everything and understand the variance between the plan and the actual for everything, we had to give a home to these functions so that we could separate out plan from actual. So in the future state, we've got two different systems here that we're going to use to do this. One is Cal Planning that you've been hearing about. That's our planning system. The familiar refrain that we use is, it's just a plan. It's really just a plan. And this is actually a huge mindset shift if you're moving from a world where your budget is not just a plan, it's actually your appropriation, it's your balance, it's your carry forward, it's a real thing. Whereas on this, also, temporary budget is a double entry bookkeeping system and a ledger. So you're really doing transactions. Here in the plan, you just make it up. You better you better do it well. Don't get me wrong, but you might say I'm going to get $1 million more in revenue, and perhaps I'm not going to do anything in expense. I'm just going to increase my revenue by $1 million, and I'm not going to make any other plan for that. But in TempBudg, you had to do a journal, so debit, credit. What are you doing? Okay, so first, this is pretty easy. How are we going to budget for revenue and expenses, a traditional planning function? We'll do that in CalPlan. Now, this was a real big thing. This was a big shift. So how are we going to move money around on campus? I think we referenced this earlier. The idea of transfers of funds in our actual ledger. We learned by what Harvard did, what Michigan did, what various other schools have done, and that's, you do in fact sometimes in a distributed research university actually move balances around on campus if you don't book your revenues right where they need to be, and that certainly describes Berkeley. So we created this new account series that you'll see a teeny bit about, which for us we separated out as its own thing so that folks wouldn't be confused about what this is. It's not revenue, it's not expense. You can't transfer money from one fund to another fund in this series, but you'll get a chance to see some more of that. Then for inter-fund resource transfers, this is really below the line stuff, right? This is us funding a capital project or us pulling principal out of an endowment. So this we're doing using fund balance accounts, below the line accounts. And carry forward balances, again, that's a fund balance. And so these fund balance accounts obviously existed in our books before, but we tended to code them with central campus orgs. We tended to just sort of abstract all that away from our campus users, much like we did the revenue, on that prior slide, so that their world was a little simpler. But if we want them to manage this big, complex, distributed organization more holistically, we actually needed to give them the tools to do that. So that's what we're doing here, and we're bringing that full, real GL view to the campus users. And this allows us to do some exciting stuff that we can't do in TempBudg world without going through a lot of contortions. And that's, you can plan for a transfer that you haven't done yet. I might be planning to give a department $10 million, but it might depend on what their utility bill really was. And in TempBudg, if I gave them $10 million, I gave it to them. I got to go back and take it back. But here I could just plan for what it's going to be. That's not the same as giving it to you. And then later on, we can see what I actually gave you and whether I was right or wrong about how much I was planning to give you. So that's a different function that we weren't able to do before. And similarly, we can have a plan for how much carry forward we're going to have at the end of the year. We can have a plan for what we're going to contribute to capital. Whereas prior, in the prior world, when these things were smushed together, the plan and the transaction were the same thing. And that pushed you out into spreadsheets in order to have a real plan and out of the system of record. Okay. And so just a teeny bit about these operating transfer accounts I mentioned. Bradley designed a great series of these accounts that would really add a lot of value for department managers, deans, to understand the funding flows on campus. One of the things about having so much stuff smushed into TempBudg was that it was really hard to understand what you had really gotten in the year. You had to drill into line level detail in order to understand, oh, I got $1 million from the chancellor, and then I gave $900,000 to my subordinate unit. All that was smushed together, and it just looked like I have $100. But with these transfer accounts, we're able to call out different things. And so we've got one layer of accounts that show support from central campus and more detail in there that we're not showing. But here's how much money we gave you to cover benefits cost increases. Or here was what your general basic budget allocation was. This is money for temporary teaching support or a special program. It breaks out at the account level. And then separately, there are other layers of accounts that show money generally going out from a dean's perspective. So you can sort of run a report in actuals on one org and see, here's all the money that I got, and here's what I did with it, what left, and what the balance between the two was in year. And then below the line further, what my fund balances were to begin with and what I think they will be at the end of the year. So that's pretty different. Okay, what happened there? Aha, check. Okay, so I think that's sort of how we thought about turning off the TempBudg. And Barbara and Bradley will be around at lunch, as will I, and I'm happy to talk more about that. It's a big subject that's kind of confusing, but actually really critical for us here at Berkeley. Okay.